See, this is why you need a phone, because I can just look at it.
Okay, think we're good?
Yeah.
All right. Before we get started, I wanted to give some context. Now, I worked on a project about a month and a half ago with my friend Nicole. Now, she's also a cinematographer based in Toronto, and I decided that I was going to take the role of being a camera operator. Now, given some of these sets, they're very much non-traditional, even though we're working with crews, and sometimes you have to overlap your duties in order to make the project exactly how you want. Today's video is going to be more of a podcast talking about this particular project. Now, the order of when these are uploaded are a little bit skewed, so I am going to leave some of the videos that reference this shoot in the description down below, but if you have some headphones, throw them on and just enjoy the show, really. We've both kind of done both of these jobs before, so in terms of being only responsible for the cinematography, how is that different than not necessarily always worrying about camera all the time?
The main difference between a DP and someone who is camera operating is the director of photography is the one who is curating the actual looks. So like in order to curate a look, you have to think about the lighting and the camera movement and the type of camera / lenses / filters. So like you are thinking about gear, you're thinking about lighting, so you have your whole Genie gaff lighting department, and then you're also curating the camera movement. So in a lot of these cases, a lot of the answers that you are going to be talking about also come from the director too. Yeah. So like you and the director are always talking about creative, and you're essentially the translator. This is like the best way that I explain it to everyone is the director of photography talks with the director. The director is the one that has all of the ideas. They have the looks, they have like the vision, and you're essentially translating that into logistics. So like if you want something to feel floaty, like all of these adjectives are things that like we hear and we have to translate it to say, okay, if you want it floaty, do you want that to, if it's a slower song, let's say, a floaty, whimsical, soft feeling, let's say, what does that translate to? Does that mean you want handheld? Does that mean you want slow push-ins with a gimbal? You know what I mean? All of those things will play a part. If you want it to look funky, that's a perfect example for our latest music video shoot. If you want something to look funky, you tend to err on the side of wider lenses, talent being a little closer up to get that distorted effect. That's like on the talent, or that's on the lens category, right? So each category will feed into the story, and that conversation deals with the director, whereas the camera operator is mainly focusing on the technical gear and making sure you have picture all the time, and making sure you have picture just means that the signal from the camera is going to any of the wireless monitors that you have so that the director can see what the vision is that you're executing.
Well, I think ours is a little bit different because I guess we were both splitting up some of those roles in a little bit, right? Yeah. So for example, I don't know how to do a lot of things on a cyc wall. Like it's not something that I'm privy to, right? So in terms of the look, I think you took most of the reins on that. And then from my perspective, like I guess what I was doing was, what technology do we need to make what you want things to look the way that they need to look, right? So there's a kind of balancing of technical decisions between, if you tell me like, hey, we have a funkier song, we want the RGB lights, for example, or we want to have this certain art piece in the back. I have to think about, okay, well, or I guess what taking on this project, instead of just saying, well, we'll operate on anything, it's more so, well, let's use these technical decisions in terms of the gear to make sure that we have our best shot for what we're looking for. That might be a little bit different. I think sometimes when there's some camera operators, like they just know camera package and they roll with it. But I guess a little bit in this one where we kind of split church and state with the look and the technical decisions, there was a little bit of overlap because that's also a load off of you, right? We wouldn't necessarily be able to get so many looks in one day if you also had to think about, well, what camera, what lenses, how are we going to source out getting the dolly movement and the gimbal at the same time, and like when do we go to handheld or when do we go to sticks, and which cameras do that, right?
I think it's important to note that some of our decisions were also based on budget, because conveniently DJI's new, what is it called actually?
So like with the Focus Pro and like having the gimbals and stuff like that allowed us to be able to have those and not necessarily have to pay for them. You know what I mean? Like those were kind of brought in.
To have those and to also have nobody pulling. Like there were so many people on set that were like, whoa, I didn't even, like, why is it going on its own? And everyone was confused, right? So to have the LiDAR system is super efficient, I think, because you don't have to communicate with literally another human being to pull focus for you. So that was really Cool. And for more solo filmmaking stuff that we do, that's going to be a game changer for Cine Glass to automatically be autofocus. Like,
I think the big thing with that one, this is not like a sponsored DJI video, this is just kind of part of talking about the shoot. What was really cool is the ecosystem that it has. Because it wasn't just, oh, you could use LiDAR, that's it. Because like you can get that otherwise. But it was the idea where like I could connect my gimbal to a monitor to have somebody pull on the gimbal for me while at the same time the Focus Pro is working. But then that ecosystem works with my phone. So whenever we had to do lens changes or anything, like we're able to kind of move in that way. But again, like when you only have to worry about the look, and then I have to, like when I'm taking on the technical stuff, now we have two specialists, right? And it fills in the gaps where those things are. If I said, hey, Nicole, here's a bunch of gimbals and some LiDAR, you might be like, what do I do with this? Yeah. Where at the same time, if you're like, hey, Kofi, shoot a bunch of cyc wall looks, and not like get 9 of them in a day, I wouldn't know what to do with that, right? So it kind of was like a nice kind of meshing. And I think even despite the traditional way that like operator and DP works, is sometimes just like, whatever the DP doesn't want to operate on is what the camera operator does. Like if he's sitting on a chair on a dolly slider, like he's not hiring an operator to do that. But if there's like somebody on a Ronin or like a Steadicam, like he's hiring another person on. But I think what's happening too is that you could also take on those roles where you take a little bit of a load off the DP so they can focus more on the art. And then you have tech junkies like me that kind of figure out how are we going to find the right pieces to fit into those puzzles too.
Specifically with camera, because I got to have so much time and sit with the lighting plans. Like we had concepts. We had originally we had what, 5? I think 5.
We had 5.
5 looks.
It was more than 5.
It was more than 5, but each, I guess, look had its own type of lighting. So I could sit with that and think, okay, where is the light actually going to go? Can we rig a spotlight to this grid, in our studio? So those kind of technical decisions on the lighting side, I think I'm grateful that we did it, because that's a side of DPing that I need to work on. Like it's forever something that people will need to work on, but lighting is so, I guess it's such a key part to the DP's responsibilities versus camera, where that's more technical and like gear focus. So it's just like basically the ability to translate what that looks like and think, okay, what technical pieces of lighting do I need to like translate that look? And you're basically doing the exact same. Like if we have something funky, what's the gear that we need to use? So actually that's interesting, because typically like the DP does that both, right? But having you was like basically the extension of, like, I didn't need to really worry about that side, which typically I do. So it was nice.
I think it might be a little bit the same way that, like, some movies have like multiple directors, and like some people take on some of the aspects of director and some people like just work with talent. And maybe it's just because of our background where we didn't necessarily take the traditional way of doing things, where like now we're kind of splitting up these categories. Like now what would be on a Wikipedia definition of being a director of photography would be all of those things in one. But because we came from an aspect of like, hey, we just kind of roughed it on our own and now we're working in bigger teams, you're almost kind of bleeding those things as well. But also I find in some sets, like you might be a camera operator per se, but you're taking on other roles to help like you're basically, my job is to help the DP. Camera operator is just what gets put on the credits, right? And things become a little bit different. It's like when I key gripped a bigger short film. Sometimes some of those responsibilities between like just being in G&E in general, they bleed over each other. But you don't really go like, well, I want to be put as a gaffer now. I'm like, no, like you're still a key grip, but like you're just helping your department. And it doesn't necessarily matter it just matters what comes out at the end, right? Not necessarily what title you get at the beginning. But I think that might be a future workflow too. Like some people might, especially situations like this where like I have gaps and you have gaps and they're filled in with the other person, where you could take on different roles, but those roles might become a little bit more specialized depending on how the shoot goes. But that being said, what are situations where you want to kind of separate church and state, so to speak? Like you want to be just the DP and you don't want to have to worry about operating, because there's still a lot of people probably watching this that like do both. When are situations where you're like, no, like this is a shoot where like I'm gonna hire out camera department, and one where you're like, I could do this by myself?
You said it. If you're hiring someone, it means you have the budget for it. And so if we were able to do this on a bigger scale and we had specific budgets and it's budget and it's also time. So if we had more time to recruit the people that we wanted, that's also, a benefit. But budget is like the main thing really, because if in general the entire production budget is bigger, there's usually more or higher expectations, right?
Yeah.
So like if you have a higher production value, I'm just going to be the DP and make sure that I have someone specifically allocated for studies, someone specifically for Ronan, and each of those will have their own first ACs, so and then, funnels down that way. But with a bigger production value, you're also expected to.
Those things are almost kind of expect to be packaged in. Like if you're working on something that's like, and this might sound like a big number to people, but like if you're working on like a $10,000 project, you might have to be the operator DP.
Yeah.
Like it probably depending on what the shoot is, a lot of times you might have to be. But if it's like $100,000, you can't. I guess you can't afford to kind of put that responsibility into somebody else and empower them to do it as well.
I think the second thing I thought of, so budget is one. I think number two is like, if you do actually find someone that fits the puzzle piece that you're missing, then like that's great. But a lot of times you don't. And it's either like you can recognize that you have the gap and you're now hiring someone on to do that role. But if you yourself are like, exactly what vision you're wanting, you have all the specifics like dialed in already as the DP, or like even just as the camera operator, you might not necessarily need to like split the responsibilities. Like let's say you already, like I know your recent music video for the Petra, like Petra was directing. That was friggin' sick, by the way. That was so cool. But like perfect example is you guys, she was directing it, right?
She was a choreographer, but she also was like, by being a choreographer, by extension, you're the director. Yeah.
Extension. So like you showed up with gear and lighting, so like you DP'd that, but she also like filled in the creative.
Yeah, like she did all the dances, and then she's like, I know what the dance looks like, but I don't know anything else. Like, what do I do? Where do I go from there? And that's when we started doing, like, I literally sat there and I'm like, well, this song is from XYZ year. Let me go and look up all the music videos that like are from the same year, and what do those look like? And how do I pick and then it was like the other side of it. It's like, well, then how do I pick the gear to make it look like it's a 90s, 2000s music video? And like, how do I make those technical decisions to be able to do that? But I think also it kind of depends too, right? Like you're almost filling your gaps. Like it might be budget dependent, but it's also skill dependent, I guess, as well. Because if I had, say for example, someone told me to do this shoot by myself and they said, here's an unlimited budget, I would still have gaps I needed to fill, right? Or even if they said you had no budget, I think I would still source those things out later on, right? I wouldn't necessarily take it upon myself to be like, well, I'm not given much of a budget. Let me absorb the stress and responsibility and do a bad job. You almost have to kind of go with somebody else and try to make a deal and be like, hey, it's not a giant budget, but like I need this gap filled. I can provide X, Y, and Z, and you work back and forth from there.
And it depends in our scenario, the talent and I had worked together numerous times, so I kind of knew his vibe. I knew what he was looking for in a sense. And I had only produced his stuff before I hadn't actually shot. So I knew from a producer standpoint of what his expectations were in terms of the crew size and like the production value. And as you go forward with your music career, your budgets ebb and flow, but you still want to maintain the same production value. You want to maintain the image, the public image of these music videos looking like $20,000, even though they're not. So that was a benefit of me coming on because I had previous experience with him. So similar to the Petra situation where she has this vision, she has the choreo, but like, how do you execute? It was the same thing where like, he has the vision, he has the songs, he has the vibe of them. How do you translate that into actual things like lighting or camera? So but those are the two differences. It's just, I would say budget and then skill set gaps between the two.
Now in terms of like the deliverables for this project, it's a little bit different. We were both talking about kind of working a little bit in the music video scene or like working with other artists, but it wasn't necessarily a music video, especially for this shoot. Like we were making visualizers, which are gonna go somewhere else a little bit different than music videos go. That's a little bit different of a workflow in production, I started to find. I feel like clients now, they're looking for quality, like their content in vertical format or like short form social media stuff, but not necessarily in like the traditional music video space, but they still want high quality. So like in this shoot, we kind of did that, but you have more music video experience than I do. How do you think that's gonna start to reconcile, especially for people that wanna be DPs in the future and might work with some of these artists?
I think for those who are starting out as DPs, offering visualizers and shorter form content versus music videos, you'll be able to pitch that to the artist way easier. Like their money just what's the saying? Like your money travels longer, or like it's just more worthwhile for the artist to spend probably around the same budget for one music video, but then you're just taking fragments of each song. Like for example, we did 9 songs in one day, which is nuts. Like you could never do 9 music videos, and you can barely do 1 music video in a day. So like for you to I guess expand the life of these songs and still maintain the same quality, and you're shooting in the same space. It's just the lights that change, the props change, the focal lengths change. Really, I feel like that's so much more beneficial to the artist, because yes, it's great to have these like very long format music videos. It's not even long format; it's like 3+ minutes for a song, but for you to tell a proper story and not have it just be artistic, let's say, because I feel like every artist is like, I want to tell a story with this. There's like a narrative behind it, even if maybe there isn't, they still want to tell something. And telling a story with music videos are expensive. Like it's super expensive. You now have talent, you have to, so visualizers, I think that will definitely become more popular. And I mean, it's what you see on Spotify. Like it's at the back of, your track when you're scrolling. So those assets for artists are super important, but it was also really nice for us because we got to test so many things in like one day. So it was really nice.
I kind of feel like it felt a little bit more like a training ground for when you have longer music videos, because any one of those setups could have been its own music video, but because they were supposed to be 15, 20-second videos, your shot timings are way faster, right? And then you can decide what things work, what things don't work, and then if one of those things do well, you just do it again, right? And then now you've essentially done previs for 9 different music videos with a particular client, and then like for me, like, and I'm a giant business head, you can expand that into shooting 9 full-length music videos based on whatever performs the best, and stuff like that. And it's weird because coming from the fitness space, it was very social first, and not very like there's not a lot of commercial brand story films, mostly because like it's just the nature of the industry is a little bit different. But getting into more like doing it that workflow, I'm like, oh, this is my wheelhouse, because I've only like 4 campaigns I've worked on, I've only made short form content, right? Everything's 30-something seconds. Well, it's a little bit different, but I think it's interesting that you can still be part of the filmmaking industry and not have to worry about making super long form content. And as much as what went into this shoot, even though people might consider it just being TikToks or Reels or just vertical content, it's not that anymore. Like that, it's a very viable, very real thing that can still be taken seriously by people that are in production, and it doesn't necessarily become a value less just because it's turned from 16:9 to 9:16.
Still a video. You're still managing. How many people do we have? At least
14.
Yeah,
I think it was 14. It was a lot of people.
Yeah, so like to be, I guess, to oversee like that big of a crew, that's in itself, right? Like as a DP, that your leadership and your managerial people skills, like that's really important. So that will translate to it doesn't matter how long the final product is, in my opinion. Like if your quality is still the same, you're still going to have all of these moving pieces and people that you need to help you execute it. So I feel like there's totally a stigma around it, but things will change. Like I don't think, you know what I mean? Like the narrative is, maybe there will be some judgment still, but I feel like it will change.
I think the game's changing. I think where people are kind of consuming it, where for business, for a lot of us it's moving to more of that social side of things. Like you can't, and that's why you also see some of the tools are changing. In what world can you have a solo operator essentially be able to take on some follow focusing duties in a single unit, right?
Like that is, it just still mind blows me, because there's always that limit where if you're a solo filmmaker and you want cine glass, you always have to now think, if I shoot with this cine glass, I either have to pull myself and have one of those little follow focus units, or I have to hire someone to operate this. And
in some situations, you don't have to anymore, which is like, I mean, I don't think First AC's jobs are gone forever. I think you still need them. And also there's more responsibilities for First AC than just pulling focus. But the fact that the fact that the barrier is closing for some of these guys that don't have access to giant crews and big budgets, it's there. And I think those guys are also going to be the ones that are gonna, like, honestly, this kind of video is for them too as well, to kind of see what it looks like. Even though you're delivering a bunch of short form content, it's still a gigantic production. It's still a lot of stuff that goes on, right? And it's taken just as serious. Like, you should play the same way, right? It doesn't matter if you're playing the last place team in the league or you're playing someone who was champions last year. Your game should still be the same, and no matter where it's going to be shared. I'd even argue the people that are kind of making high production vertical stuff now are probably going to be the ones that are going to have a bit more longevity because they're adapting with the times.
Yep, exactly. Yeah, I think one thing that came to mind, like when you were just talking about how, yes, like flexibility is important, but when you have to play at the same level each time, like I get made fun of sometimes for that, because it, like, sometimes people will come to me with an idea and I'm like, we should do it this way. And they're like, it's not that serious. Like, we don't have to go that big. And I'm like, well,
why did you come to
why
me?
not?
Why
like,
did you come to me?
That's the only way that I want to execute. So like, if it's like a 3 to 4 person thing, it can still be done in a really like high level way, but it's just like, I don't know, there's like a flow that I'm starting to develop, which is fun. And like having that same amount of support, like the amount of team and crew that are with you during those shoots, like it's kind of necessary, because then
it's also just kind of nice too, because like how hard, like literally, if anybody had to double up responsibilities, how hard would that have been more on everybody, right? So I think it is kind of one of those things where if you can facilitate, and also like the way that like money is going into some of these like smaller shoots, you can facilitate having a crew with you to shoot vertical. It's not outside of the norm, right? So it is it's very different. And I think this shoot should be, and the BTS is going to be out here as well. You guys probably have already seen some of the DJI stuff as well. We're actually going to talk about cinematic breakdown. Nicole's doing a cinematic breakdown. She's doing a lighting breakdown and some raw BTS. I'm going to talk about a little bit about some of the technical stuff that we used for this shoot, because those decisions are important. But yeah, I want you guys to kind of take this away and knowing that just because you have a camera doesn't necessarily mean you're a cinematographer. There's other responsibilities, but at the same time, some of these gear and tech videos you're consuming also can translate onto set as long as you have the proper context and what it applies to. You guys have to go and follow Nicole. I'm gonna leave her channel down in the description down below. We have about 3 more videos, I think, coming from this shoot that are gonna come out. And we also have a couple more projects coming up where there's gonna be a couple of things. We're gonna change roles up, we're gonna change up locations and stuff like that. So stay tuned for that, guys. Thank you again for watching this video. Kind of a new format, but we'll see you in the next one. Peace.
go subscribe.
I hope so. I hope they do that.